two massive oil tankers from Russia's Shadow Fleet, valued at over $2 billion, were attacked while secretly loading at a hidden port on the Baltic coast. Under the cold dawn fog, Ukraine launched an unprecedented precision strike, targeting Russia's most critical illicit oil export lifeline. The target was an underground port complex protected by a multi-layered air defense system, S-400, Panzer S-1 and Buk M3, capable of transporting up to 1 million barrels of oil daily, evading global sanctions. At the time of the attack, the port was operating at full capacity. Pressure valves were at maximum, oil was flowing into the ship's hulls, and Russian radar was burned out by over 30 decoy UAVs. Worse, the entire fire suppression and automatic circuit breaking systems were disabled just seconds before the main strike began. For years, the underground port and Shadow Fleet enabled Russia to sustain its war funding amid international sanctions. But this morning, that lifeline was incinerated by Ukraine. How did Ukraine bypass Russia's advanced air defense grid? How did they approach the target at close range without detection? Don't look away from the screen before the secret is revealed. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts on this battle. At 3:12 a.m. in the dense darkness east of the Baltic Sea, two massive oil tankers operating under commercial aliases quietly approached an underground port on the edge of a fuel transfer complex not marked on any map. On paper, this port didn't exist, but in reality, it was a critical link in the Shadow Fleet. Russia's massive illicit oil fleet used to evade sanctions, transporting millions of barrels via ships flying false flags. That night, the two ships, one registered to a shell company in Liberia, the other in Seychelles, each had a deadweight exceeding 100,000 tons, with cargo valued at over $2 billion at market prices. The port's loading station number 4 had activated its pressure valves. Crude oil from underground storage began pumping through the loading pipes, preparing to enter the transport ships. Meanwhile, hundreds of kilometers west, a secret Ukrainian command center switched to absolute radio silence. They didn't issue attack orders, they just waited. Why wait? Because when the ships were docked, the pumps were running and the entire technical chain was at full capacity. Any explosion would trigger a catastrophic chain reaction. The impact would no longer be purely military, it would strike the economic spine of the enemy. But this wasn't just an economic equation. The secret oil port was guarded by Russia's most robust three-layered air defense grid in the north, comprising tiered S-400 systems, low-altitude Panzer S-1 and 91 N-6E Big Bird and 96 L-6E Cheeseboard surveillance radars. In Russian defense doctrine, this was an A2AD no-go zone, impenetrable to any low or mid-altitude aircraft. Russian air defense officers here believed anything entering the electronic shield would be destroyed before reaching the protective perimeter. That belief was their biggest blind spot. Ukraine spent months analyzing Russian radar signal patterns, simulating blind spots caused by the Earth's curvature, and pinpointing the exact moment radar systems would be overwhelmed by false signals. In the air, Ukrainian reconnaissance UAVs recorded the port's operational rhythm, average oil pumping times, main control valve locations, connection points between storage tanks and ships, and coastal air defense patrol cycles. They didn't search for weaknesses, they created them. The goal wasn't disruption, it was to make everyone believe everything was still under control. And as Russia sank into a false sense of security, every UAV, every drop of fuel, every detonator, every remotely guided electrical signal began to move. No declarations, no warning signals, just prolonged silence, and within it, an attack worth 3,000 kg of explosives, waiting for the perfect moment to engulf Russia's dark financial machine in flames. The plan began in silence at an underground UAV command center in western Ukraine, where a team of military engineers, navigation officers, and electronic warfare experts spent weeks simulating the radar terrain of the Baltic coast. Using high-resolution satellite data, they reconstructed the entire ground sensor map of Russia's air defense system around the target port complex. Every S-band radar block, every Panzer gun emplacement, every oil pipeline was entered into a tactical simulation system. From this, they calculated sensor dead zones, spatial gaps where radar waves were blocked by terrain, the sea horizon, or natural reflective structures. Those blind spots were the gateway to infiltration. The main attack force consisted of 3 groups: strike, jamming, and diversion. The direct assault was led by 6 UJ-26 Bomber Max UAVs, a long-range heavy payload variant of battle-tested kamikaze drones. Each carried a 3,000 kg bunker-busting bomb, designed to penetrate 2 meters of reinforced concrete before detonating inside the airtight structure of fuel storage. That was lethal weight, and the biggest challenge. The heavy payload meant the Bomber Max couldn't fly high or fast, but that suited the strategy perfectly. Flying ultra-low, skimming the sea, silent as a wisp of smoke, Escorting the bomber were 8 Banshee X UAVs, the silent orchestrators of the battle from a distance. The Banshee X carried no weapons. Instead, they were equipped with active S-band jamming pods, powerful enough to disrupt radar imaging across tens of kilometers. Unlike traditional electronic warfare UAVs that jam locally, the Banshee X could simulate multiple false signals, creating virtual decoys that made radar believe dozens of targets were approaching from multiple directions simultaneously. The outermost layer was 30 Scythe UAVs, cheap plywood drones shaped like combat UAVs, but designed solely as decoys. Each mimicked the size, radar signature, and flight path of a cruise missile. They would swarm sensitive areas near the port, an abandoned military airfield, an exposed radar station, or an old barracks. All were suggested targets for Russia, forcing them to fire from a distance. When Russian air defenses locked onto these UAVs, launching salvos of 48 N-6 missiles, they believed the real threat was incoming. But the true strike force was still out at sea. The entire UAV fleet was programmed with 3 fake approach vectors, only one of which was real. The Scythe UAVs approached from the northeast, simulating a direct assault on the port's western perimeter. Meanwhile, the Banshee X veered south, into an area controlled by a mixed air defense array of Pantsir and Buk M3. Both vectors were designed to deplete air defense resources. The real strike force, the Bomber Max group, silently looped out to sea, flying below 40 meters, hugging wave patterns to minimize radar reflection and exploiting the Earth's curvature to approach the defense line in a radar blind spot. At the highest altitude beyond all detection, an RQ-21 mod hovered silently at 12,000 meters, acting as the eye in the sky. It emitted no signals, only capturing infrared imagery of the port and the Shadow Fleet ships loading oil. Once it confirmed the 2 ships were connected to the loading pipes and pumping pressure was at maximum, the RQ-21 sent a laser-guided signal to the target and relayed the real attack command to the bomber group. The encrypted command, transmitted via frequency hopping, took less than 1.3 seconds to arrive. In the rear, mission engineers programmed the attack in waves, each UAV group spaced exactly 45 seconds apart. The goal was to prevent Russian radar from recovering after each decoy wave. When the first wave was detected and air defenses fired, the second wave approached from a different angle at varying speeds and altitudes. This forced the air defense system to constantly reset its processing cycle, burning out resources, depleting interceptor missiles, scattering antenna focus, and scrambling command center signals. Each UAV wave was a tactical nerve strike, as the air defense system was overwhelmed, pushed into reactive chaos, and believed it was winning. 6 3-ton monsters were hurtling toward the dark financial heart Russia had built over years, just minutes from their target. No one knew they were coming, and when they did, it was too late to stop them. At 4:41 a.m., the atmosphere at the northwest Baltic Coast Air Defense Complex shifted abruptly. The S-400's long-range 96L6E radar suddenly displayed a cluster of anomalous signals, 30 small, low-altitude targets, with weak but consistent radar reflections. On the screen, it looked exactly like a cruise missile or kamikaze UAV attack. Within 15 seconds, the nearest Pantsir S-1 battery received orders to go full combat mode. Buk M3 units to the east began their intercept sequence. Bright streaks lit up the Baltic sky as 57 E-6 and 9 M3-117 missiles roared into the air, a symphony of steel, fire, and sound. But that was just the surface. Beneath that radar layer, where the sea barely rippled in the dim pre-dawn light, the 6 UJ-26 Bomber Max drones glided silently, flying just over 30 meters above the water. They were so low that sea salt mist began fogging their guidance camera lenses. Each maintained a precise 400-meter spacing in a staggered triangular formation to optimize communication and minimize simultaneous detection. The distance to the target was now under 40 kilometers. In minutes, barring major interference, the entire fleet would enter the kill zone. Simultaneously, at medium altitude nearby, the Banshee X group activated. Their integrated jamming pods fired S-band frequency bursts, scrambling radar on nearby warships and coastal surveillance systems. On Russian radar screens, just as the Scythe drones were mostly shot down, a new wave of virtual targets appeared, blending active jamming with delayed reflection signals. The air defense system lost orientation for minutes, unable to distinguish real targets from noise. In that 90-second gap, when radar couldn't lock any target with high confidence, the 6 Bomber Max drones slipped past the outer perimeter, entering the direct kill zone without a single air defense missile fired at them. At 4:52 a.m., the attack began. The first 3 bomber drones abruptly climbed in a short-range ascent, diving near vertically into the port complex's central area. Target: the technical control station managing the entire system of pressure, temperature, and oil flow through the loading pipes. The 3,000 kg bunker-busting bombs pierced 2 meters of reinforced concrete, activating delayed detonation, and exploded inside the pressure chamber. The resulting gas pressure instantly obliterated the technical floor, collapsing the control dome and rupturing main pipelines. A series of automatic valves were blasted out of position, spilling oil across the underground distribution area. The next 2 bomber drones targeted the main storage tank, holding about 28,000 mil-cubic of crude oil. Unlike the bunker busters, these carried thermobaric bombs. Upon detonation, they released a suspended fuel cloud, igniting a second explosion in low oxygen conditions, sucking air from the surroundings and creating a massive pressure blast. The reinforced concrete structure around the tank cracked like an eggshell. Oil spilled onto partially melted concrete, igniting along leak paths and spreading fire across the port. A glowing orange-red blaze gradually consumed the horizon. Meanwhile, the 2 Shadow Fleet tankers, directly connected to the loading pipes, couldn't disengage in time. One was hit in its electronic control compartment, losing all engine and pump control, catching fire within minutes as heat from the spreading blaze reached it. The other was struck at the junction between the loading pipe and the ship's oil intake system. Oil gushed out in waves, meeting heat from a nearby explosion, erupting into a fierce blaze with a fire column over 70 meters high. Over 11,000 tons of crude oil in storage and on the ships burned directly in under 10 minutes. The heat at the explosion's epicenter reached over 1,400 Se, enough to deform naval-grade steel and melt reinforced concrete foundations. Fire spread through pipeline layers, secondary valves, and backup tanks, with each secondary explosion pushing flames tens of meters further. The automatic fire suppression system meant to react first failed entirely. The reason? The outer pressure regulation power station was destroyed seconds before the main attack. One of the decoy Scythe UAVs was ordered to crash into the port's central power grid, causing a total circuit failure. Emergency pumps didn't start. Overflow valves didn't close. Inert gas fire suppression systems in the pipelines lost power. The port was completely paralyzed. All rescue responses were forced into manual mode, with ship crews and technicians scrambling in panic. In under 9 minutes, the strategic port complex dedicated to Russia's covert oil exports became a sea of fire, with intermittent explosions echoing from storage tanks, pipelines, engine rooms, and ship hulls. Even Russian air defense officers watching directly were stunned by the destruction's scale, far beyond any drill scenario. This was no ordinary UAV raid. It was a strategic earthquake written in oil, bombs, and ruthless precision. The firestorm at the underground port complex didn't just send black smoke curling into the Baltic sky. It left a deep strategic void in Russia's covert war machine. 4 Shadow Fleet tankers were damaged, 2 completely destroyed, their blackened, warped hulls half-submerged like steel carcasses. Experts assessed near-zero chance of technical recovery, especially with electromechanical systems, fuel compartments, and main drive shafts melted beyond repair. The attack's financial toll is estimated at over $2 billion, including unshipped cargo, vessel losses, technical equipment, and port system restoration costs. The port was fully paralyzed for the next 96 hours, freezing all oil loading and unloading. Commercial satellite monitoring data shows at least 14 other tankers were forced to reroute, including VLCC-class vessels that can only dock at comparable facilities. During those 4 days, about 15% of Russia's seaborne oil exports couldn't be transported, causing significant disruptions in logistics and international cash flow. With oil prices averaging around $80 per barrel at the time, each day of paralysis equated to $80 million in direct losses, not counting indirect impacts on transport markets and long-term oil delivery contracts. Post-attack analyses quickly exposed fatal flaws in Russia's supposedly impenetrable radar and air defense systems. Data from reconnaissance and even Russian radar in the combat zone revealed that, due to radar horizon limitations, ultra-low flying UAVs like the Boaber Max were only detected under 12 kilometers from the target. At a cruising speed over 400 kilometers h, that left less than 100 seconds from detection to impact, too short for radar to lock, calculate intercept angles, fire, and adjust missiles. What radar saw was merely the shadow of a strike already succeeding. Additionally, the Banshee X electronic warfare platforms proved far more dangerous than typical jammers. Captured radar signal data showed they didn't blind radar, but misdirected target identification, making Pantsir and Book batteries believe targets were coming from different directions or altitudes. Banshee's simulated radar signatures even mimic piloted aircraft or AGM-158 cruise missiles, luring Russian defenses to fire at non-existent targets. From downed UAV wreckage, Russia discovered a troubling reality. Ukraine wasn't just repurposing civilian tech, but had advanced to cheap, smart tactical UAVs with AI-guided terrain adaptation, active radar feedback sensors, and composite shells optimized for low radar reflection. These UAVs were simple enough for mass production, yet sophisticated enough to mimic radar behavior and deceive automated defense systems, a capability once seen only in NATO doctrinal simulations. Operationally, Russia was forced to reroute its strategic oil transport, using ports hundreds of kilometers away like Uklu or Novorossiysk. This spiked operating costs, extended transit times, fragmented port capacity, and created new bottlenecks in the wartime fuel supply chain. Once secret routes now appeared on international maps, exposing Moscow to Western satellite scrutiny and pressure from global insurance, credit, and transport markets. Militarily, Russian air defense units in the region were severely stretched, forced into blanket deployments to counter multi-directional, multi-layered, low-altitude attacks. They were left not knowing where to strike first, constantly switching targets and losing tactical coherence. Subsequent counterstrikes were disjointed, disorganized, and ineffective. More critically, the attack exposed a systemic tactical flaw. When overwhelmed by numerous small, cheap, agile targets tightly integrated with electronic warfare, even the most advanced defense network could collapse in minutes. Ukraine didn't strike the moment they found the target. They weren't rushed, impatient, or swept up in the pace of conventional warfare. They waited. They waited until every element reached peak vulnerability. When the two Shadow Fleet tankers were firmly docked, the pumps were at maximum pressure, and Russian air defenses had burned through resources and attention on decoy targets. At that moment, when everyone thought the threat had passed, the real attack began. This wasn't a typical UAV raid. It wasn't a reckless assault hoping for damage. This was a chess move, a precise strategic scale strike executed with cold patience. Everything was calculated: radar range, Earth's curvature, reaction lag, shift changes, fuel temperature, and even the psychology of air defense officers believing they'd neutralized all targets. In under 10 minutes, a strategic port became an inferno. Over 11,000 tons of oil burned. Power systems, pipelines, pressure valves, and control centers collapsed in a chain of explosions. 2 tankers were completely destroyed, 2 others heavily damaged. A billion-dollar transport route was severed, and the entire defense system around it only realized the truth when black smoke rose like a flag over the icy bay. Like the most effective strikes in history, by the time the target noticed, it was too late to stop. Russian radar kept scanning the sky for decoy targets, while the Bober Max drones completed their mission, leaving behind a blackened wasteland and the acrid stench of burning oil in the sea breeze. No negotiations, no prior threats, just one clear message, written in fire and smoke. You don't need to shoot a lot, just shoot right, and at the right time. If you think this operation deserves to be remembered as a turning point in modern warfare, don't forget to subscribe for more analyses. Thank you for staying until the end. See you in the next battle, where every decision could shift the entire landscape.